Now that we've uploaded our workplace support plan to OneDrive, I'm going to pick up where we left off and open the workplace support plan itself. So as I mentioned, it's helpful if you've been able to do this prior to meeting with the employee, but in some instances that may not be possible. So it is possible for you to do this after you've had the meeting itself and completed the form. When you click on the file, this is what you'll see. Full version of the workplace support plan, and hopefully what this will provide you with is a detailed and thorough checklist that you can work through with the employee to ensure that we've done all we can to ensure their safety and their happiness within the workplace, and that we're robustly responding to their domestic abuse concerns and supporting them. So one of the things that was really important when I was creating this was to consider how we use the information that's contained, as it's obviously incredibly sensitive, and how we also gave that employee assurance that we were only going to use it for the purposes that we'd stated within the form. So to do this, I worked with John Watts to create an almost mini privacy policy, which you'll see here at the beginning of the form. I felt it was really important to be transparent about why we were gathering this information and what we were going to use it for going forward and how we were going to do so. So what I would recommend that you do is work with the employee to work through this and to consider these instances here where we may have to make exceptions to keeping the information contained within this form. Those are if there are concerns that the employee or any other person is at serious risk of harm, as I mentioned earlier. Where this is so, you do have a safeguarding responsibility to escalate or share those concerns through those processes. But it also may be where an employee wishes for you to support them or to share the information that they've divulged to you through this conversation with a specialist service. And actually what that can be is a really helpful thing to make sure that they don't have to go through the process of repeating the same information. And this potentially minimises the risk of re-traumatisation for them. So if we can do that with their consent, then you are able to share the completed workplace support plan with a specialist service if they agree to you doing so. But also as well, we recognise that for some people, as I mentioned in the earlier sessions, there may be ongoing performance or absence issues that are going on around their domestic abuse concerns and that may be related. So what we really wanted to recognise is that not all employees will want this information to be automatically divulged or considered in light of those ongoing concerns. So we really wanted to make it an option for them to be able to share this information to provide greater context, but also to recognise that there may be employees who wish to keep those aspects entirely separate and it's their prerogative to do so. So that really highlights what we can and will do around that. When we move into the meat of the form, you'll see that it is quite a straightforward checklist in which you would just complete your name, the employee's name, the date in which you're having the conversation, and then work through the boxes that follow, following a series of questions. So a lot of these are focused on really simple practical measures that we can take to ensure that we can safely contact the employee and to ensure that we can make sure that we are able to escalate any concerns that we have should they be absent or like I say, unexpectedly absent from work, or if there's an emergency situation, that we are escalating that appropriately to people that they've confirmed it's safe to do so. So really this section just talks about confirming safe contact methods and safety restrictions and considerations as well. So when we bear in mind that for some people, when they leave the workplace, there may be that they are with their abuser, and that actually it may not be safe or appropriate to contact them after a certain time. It may be only suitable to contact them through an agreed contact method, and that actually for a lot of people, if they don't have sole access to their devices, their phones, their computer, it may not be safe or appropriate for us to communicate with them through those channels. So it's really important to take that time to explore that with the employee and to confirm what is safe for them. And that may change over time, so it can be updated if it needs to be. You'll also see as well that it talks about confirming a safe contact if they were unexpectedly absent or if there was an emergency. So bearing in mind that for many people who may be being abused by someone they're in an intimate relationship with, it may be that the next of kin details are recorded as actually the abuser. And we actually really want to take this opportunity to confirm a safe contact that could be a friend, a trusted family member, even a trusted colleague, but to confirm that we have somebody who can be contacted if we do have concerns that there is a risk to the employee should we need to do so. We also then move on to considering where the employee is at that time, at this time, and it's really important to remember here that for some people, this may be the first conversation that they have had about domestic abuse, or about even recognising that what they're going through may be domestic abuse. So we really need to be treading a line between encouraging employees where possible to engage with a specialist domestic abuse service, because they are the best placed to assess risk and provide ongoing support, whilst also recognising that for many people this may not be appropriate or possible or feel safe to do so at this time, but we can empower them by providing the information about how they would do so if, when, or should they decide to, they will have that information available. And that's part of why this information is contained on this form, because it's something that the employee themselves can refer back to if they change their mind at a later time. So we can also look here to record if they've been in contact with any services, because this may provide a liaison that with their consent we can speak with, say, an IDVA or an outreach worker that they've been working with, to consider how what they have provided as support could be complemented by what we can do within the workplace. But we've also really need to, like I say, be mindful of getting their consent to do so. You'll see here that I've also included the details for Donna Ford, who was hosting in the previous sessions with me. And as she mentioned, she is happy to be contacted about any domestic abuse concern, whether that's for a resident or for an employee. And she does work from the forum, typically within the purple zone, on Wednesdays from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. So please do feel free to pop over and have a chat with her, or book some time with her by contacting her on those methods there. And it may be that if you do have prior warning and with that employee's consent, that actually you wish to complete this form with her present, so that you can kind of work through it together. That's an option that you can explore with the employee if you get the opportunity. You'll also see that we have the details for the Herts Independent Domestic Violence Advocates, otherwise known as IDVA. So IDVA typically work with victims who are at high risk of harm or violence. And you'll remember that I mentioned it's not necessary for you to be able to assess risk when responding to an employee disclosure. That is really what specialists are there to do. So if you are unsure of who to refer to, you can refer to either or of those services, and you can rest assured that they will direct onwards to the appropriate service to provide ongoing support, depending on what the level of risk is at that time. But for instance, if you were speaking to an employee and they had mentioned that they were in contact with IDVA, or they'd been provided with an IDVA, then you could assume from that the victim had been or was previously at high risk of harm, and that may then indicate that you need to keep a closer eye on the case as you go forward, and to make sure that those safety measures we put in place are really watertight, and that you're escalating any risk that does occur. Risk is not static, it can change over time, and it may be that actually a person is engaging with one service but then is referred on to another should those levels of risk change. It's just really important that where possible you are encouraging employees to engage with a service so that they can get the risk assessed and make sure that they are appropriately supported. When thinking specifically about what you as a manager and as a colleague can do, there are some really practical and hopefully quite straightforward measures that we can put in place to ensure their safety when within the workplace. So we can consider asking them whether the person who's abusing them knows where they work, whether they felt frightened at work or on their way to or from work. And we should also consider whether we can arrange the following measures to make them feel safer when they're at work, which you'll see listed here. You can also consider whether it may be appropriate to change their work start and finish times with their consent. Often, if they are being stalked or tracked on their way to or from work, this can help to disrupt those patterns and hopefully to increase safety. But it's also mindful that particularly within the darker months, we need to be aware that it may not be appropriate for that person to enter or leave the office alone, and that they may need a buddy to be there, or to get security to monitor them as or when they're entering or leaving the building, and that's something that can be arranged by speaking with them. We've also put in place a number of practical and more financial measures in light of the policy to hopefully support and alleviate some of those financial pressures that victims often face when they are being abused. So we have considered and consulted around the possibility of advanced salary payment, and what we have also agreed with SLT is that if there is a need to access a sort of emergency fund or to access funds to support somebody fleeing or accessing emergency accommodation, those sorts of things, then that can be arranged, and that would be best arranged either directly through contacting Matt Rawdon or Natasha Beresford, and you can do that on behalf of the employee. So something to discuss with them and just see if that's something they would benefit from. It's also worth bearing in mind as well that if there is any indication of financial difficulty, then there are really great resources out there to support victims with that, such as Surviving Economic Abuse, and their contact details are listed there. They can provide excellent support with advice on legal measures, divorces, and any other kind of financial measures associated with abuse. We've also put in place an additional exception to the special leave policy, which entitles employees who are victims of domestic abuse to an additional up to 6 days paid leave as part of the special leave policy. Again, that can be arranged directly through contacting HR. It was also really important to bear in mind that by rolling out this initiative across the organisation and equipping all managers, we really wanted to recognise and give the employees the opportunity to engage with whomever they felt comfortable to. And that may mean in some instances that isn't the person's direct line manager. So in those instances, we really want to make sure that the employee is empowered to be able to say whether they want any of this information to be shared with their manager or as part of performance management or absence conversations, and that's what this box details. It is also okay for them to say that they don't know to any of these and to revisit at a later time if they need to. And then towards the end, we also have looking ahead how they would like you to approach any future conversations about this. So it may be that they want to regularly schedule private check-ins with you. It may also be that they don't want it to be mentioned again unless they initiate the conversation. You could perhaps agree a code word that would allow them to discreetly mention that they needed to update you on something, and that's something that you could talk to your employee about. And again, with future proofing, to think about whether the line manager that they've disclosed to vacates their position, we really want to see if the employee would be happy for this information to be automatically shared with the replacement line manager. Again, it may be that they don't know at this time, and if there is enough forewarning or we know that the line manager is vacating or moving into another post, then there may be an opportunity to speak to the employee ahead of that and see what their preferences are at that time. It's then important just to take some time to debrief and have a recap, to look at what actions have been agreed and to follow up whether there's any further actions. And if you are unsure about how to do so, I would recommend going to the procedure because this will talk you through this process. And then you should also consider whether you feel there is a need, based on what they've told you, to escalate it as a safeguarding concern or because you believe that someone is at an immediate risk of harm. Finally, you should password protect the document by agreeing a password with the employee and doing so by following these instructions on the document, and agree a date within the following week to check in with the employee, or as agreed in the follow-up conversation about how they'd like to approach further conversations. Then this next section is just for the review stage. Once you're done with that, that's the workplace support plan complete. And that, once saved off, can then be accessed within that folder.